Bore da i chi gyd, a chroeso i'r ail ddydd Sadwrn Cenedlaethol ar ddiwrnod twym iawn yn mis Gorffennaf. Welcome everybody on a very warm day in July for our second National Saturday. And I do hope you have plenty of fluids to hand to keep you going through the day, to keep you hydrated. There will be breaks during the day, and I'll go through the agenda shortly, but make sure you get some fresh air when we have that break as well. All PowerPoints for today are available on PebblePad, so if you want to access them to follow the slides during the day, then you can download them now. You've placed some comments in the chat on your insights from the National Conference, National Conference 1, our previous Saturday back in June. So thank you for those, and maybe we can have a chat about those as we proceed through the day. For Welsh medium students, and I will speak in Welsh regarding the breakout rooms, os ydych chi am fynd i ystafell ymneilltuo i gael eich trafodaeth trwy gyfrwng y Gymraeg, a wnewch chi roi eich enw yn y chat ar hyn o bryd. So the message for Welsh medium students regarding the breakout room. So moving forward then, here is the agenda for the day. We've started promptly at 9:30, and I will go through the itinerary and revisit a little bit on assignment part 1 of your assignment, but there will be more of a focus on part 2 for this part of today. Then we'll move on to the first session, and Daya and Anne are going to be looking at analysing key challenges that create barriers to whole setting approaches. So they'll be looking at aspects such as collaboration and multi-agency working, cluster working, personal expertise and knowledge, and how you can measure success regarding the Elenco function. Then we will have a short comfort break at 11:30, a 15-minute break there. And then we will move on to one of the highlights of the day, which is our Ask the Expert session, which Laura will be hosting. And our expert for today is Lynn West from Estyn. And I will tell you a little bit more about her when I move on to the next slide. Then we will have half an hour lunch break between 1 and 1:30 before moving on to our third session, where Gareth will look at challenging stakeholders to implement change and the skills needed and the relevant theories associated with inclusive education. So he'll be looking at processes and professional practice and what is considered as effective practice in identifying opportunities for professional learning. And then we come to our final session of the day, where Danielle will summarise and reflect on some of the key points raised during our discussions throughout today. So as I mentioned, our Ask the Expert today is Lynn West from Estyn. She is His Majesty's Inspector, of course, and her focus is primarily on additional learning needs and inclusive education. But she also has done a lot of work on school support systems and Welsh medium ALN provision. So we are very fortunate to have her as our expert today. She's led and authored many Estyn reviews examining the implementation of the ALN and Education Act 2018 and wider ALN reform as well. And you might have seen her as she has produced many webinars and videos as she authored some of Estyn's thematic reports, the reports that we have referred to already during this this module, the 2023 and 2024 thematic reports, which might be really useful for you in moving on to using to support your discussion for your assignment. So she's very, very eager to hear your views as well and answer your questions. So if you haven't done so already, there's a QR code in the corner of the screen there. So please add your questions. If you've already done so, you might have thought of new questions. Please add those. As you know, she's very aware of the challenges involved in implementing the ALN reform, and she really wants to hear your views and the challenges that you you're experiencing as well as the merits of the ALN reform. So do add your questions to that QR code then, please. So moving on to the assessment, and the assessment asks you to critically evaluate ALN provision in your own educational setting, and then develop an action plan to address the barriers to inclusive practice. So as we introduced last time, there are two parts to the assessment, and these are linked, of course. Part one is an audit. And the audit is 2,500 words approximately, but like with every assignment, you have your 10% under or over. My advice to students would be, you know, to try and aim at least for that 2,500 or plus the 10%. You know, if you're under, you might not have covered everything in enough depth. So the audit asks you to conduct a critical review of your current provision and identify the strengths within your setting, but also explore areas that require further development. So consider then how effectively whole setting approaches to inclusion are embedded within your setting, and examine the barriers that may prevent learners with ALN from fully accessing those learning opportunities that are so vital to support them in making progress. And then the second one is an online or a video presentation where you present the findings. Oh, there's some feedback here. Present some findings from your audit. So if you think, I'll go back, if you think about the first part of the assignment as the what, and then the second part of the assignment as how you're going to address this and why. So second part is presenting the findings from your audit and analysing those key challenges that you identified. So you might reflect on aspects such as leadership, communication, change management skills needed to address those challenges, and then explain how stakeholders can be engaged in implementing improvements. Now, remember that the second part, your presentation, isn't just a summary of your audit. Don't repeat what you had in part one. That presentation should have more analysis, more reflection, and maybe more strategic thinking. And I'll elaborate on what I mean by that as we go through this morning. So just to recap on part one. Part one focuses on auditing your current provision, and Rhiannon took you through this in detail in our first National Saturday. There's also a grid that has been provided on the guidance sheet that might help you in order to conduct that audit within your setting. So the purpose of the audit isn't to produce a descriptive account of what exists, but rather it's critically examining how effectively inclusive practice is being implemented within the setting. And it asks you to look at barriers, and the guidance suggests that you use 2 to 3. So, you know, looking at 2 to 3 in depth will give you that criticality and that rigour that is needed at level 7 writing. So consider aspects such as current systems, policies, procedures, the strengths in provision, areas of effective practice, existing barriers to inclusion, and use evidence from research and policy. You have readings on PebblePad, you have policies which you mentioned in the last National Saturday, at school, at national level, at local authority level, and at additionally international level that you could use. So use that evidence to support your writing. So what we're looking for is a clear understanding of whole school or whole setting approaches, and that evaluation of how effectively these are embedded within your own context. So some top tips, just to recap here. Before beginning the audit, go back and revisit some of the materials that you've been introduced to. There's a very, very detailed guidance document that has been provided. It is on PebblePad. You may want to download and go through that in detail, and listen to the recording of the introductory session as well from our first Saturday. Again, that is also available on PebblePad. Another resource that is available on PebblePad for you is examples of previous assignments. Now, this assignment is tailored to your own setting, so it won't be exactly what you are looking at, but it'll give you an idea maybe of the type of content that you need to use, and maybe the structure of the assignment and how you can present your audit and your presentation. So do make use of those. For part 1, we expect you to write that in an academic style of writing, that audit. So, and I thought it would be useful to share with you if you haven't got it already from your own university, the academic phrase bank from the University of Manchester. That is quite a useful resource in order to help you develop your academic style of writing. Ac mae yna fersiwn Gymraeg hefyd, mae Prifysgol Bangor wedi datblygu y banc brawddegau yn y Gymraeg, felly mae hwnna'n helpu chi gydag arddull a llif eich ysgrifennu chi drwy gyfrwng y Gymraeg. So we are very fortunate that Bangor has a Welsh medium version of the phrase bank that is very useful for those submitting through the medium of Welsh. Referencing is important, and 20% of the marks for this assignment is for referencing. So do make sure that you adhere to the referencing guidance within your own universities. Each university will have their guidance, so my advice would be to follow that. I don't know about you, but I like to print out my referencing guidance, and whenever I am writing, I have that by my side to check and double check that I am referencing appropriately and referencing correctly. So the referencing marks are marks that you can easily get a high mark for, and that might raise the overall mark of your assignment as well. So I'm going to concentrate now on part 2 of the assignment in more detail, and this is an online presentation. So you might decide to use a format of your choice. It might be Teams, it might be PowerPoint with a recording, it might be another form of presentation, it might be some use Canva as well. It's entirely up to you what format you are using, but one piece of advice I would give you is make sure that it is accessible to tutors. I'm sure staff that are online will agree with me today when I say there's nothing more frustrating when you come to mark an assignment and you can't access that video that you want to mark. So what I've done in the past is, if I've prepared a video presentation, I've shared it with a friend or a colleague and asked, can you access this? And they've confirmed then that they can. So I'm totally confident then that that is accessible by other people and people who want to mark that assignment. So just a top tip there. But this video presentation is based on findings from your audit, excuse me, and it should move beyond describing what you've seen and what you've audited within that first part. You should include an analysis of significant challenges that you have encountered within your own setting. You might be reflecting on leadership and professional skills. You might look at strategies that are required to implement that change, and think carefully about those barriers that you've identified. Examples of these might include things such as staff values, staff confidence and training, maybe limitations of resources. I already mentioned that Lynn West has been looking at Welsh medium resources, and those of you working in Welsh medium schools might identify that as some of the limitations. There might be communication challenges, and I'm sure I saw a comment in the chat earlier reflecting on our first Saturday input, which mentioned the challenges of communication. Now, there might be inconsistency of inclusive practice across the whole school. Something might be, there might be an element of excellent inclusive practice going on in one classroom, but that isn't embedded as a whole school approach. There might be resistance to change. It might be attitudes. So there could be lots of different aspects. So as I mentioned earlier, 2 or 3 barriers to whole setting approaches. So moving forward, the guidance is here. So it should address the following points. So provide a general overview of your key audit findings. You will have at the beginning of your first assignment, set the context that you are working in. So who you are, the context of the setting, but remember to keep the setting anonymous. You know, you refer to it as School A in South Wales or School A in North Wales. That's enough information regarding your setting, and then your individual role within that setting. And it might be good at the beginning of your presentation to remind the audience of this as well. It doesn't need to be more than a sentence, just to set the context for your presentation. So the general overview of findings, just briefly summarise the most significant outcomes from your Part 1 audit, the aspects that you are going to be addressing within your presentation. And then focus on the most important barriers, those 2 to 3 barriers that you've identified, rather than trying to cover everything. You might have identified quite a lot, but choose the ones that you think are key and aspects that you think that you can address in moving forward. And then reflect on the skills and the actions needed, your action plan needed really to engage and challenge all the stakeholders within your setting. So again, just a reminder, it might be leadership skills, communication, collaboration, influencing others, conflict resolution, professional learning, attitudes, effective implementation of support staff. It could be absolutely anything. But remember that you need to support your discussion with the references to legislation such as the ALN Act, the ALN Code. We talked about the UNCRC and the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities in our previous Saturday. So those might be legislation and policies that you might want to refer to. There might be policies within your own setting. You might have an inclusion policy, an ALN policy, well-being policy that might support. Again, you can reference those, but keep your setting anonymous. So it will be School A, inclusion policy, etc. when it comes to your referencing. So the presentation should be between 4 and 8 slides, but you can use a title slide and a reference slide in addition to that. So this will keep your presentation really, really focused. If you are less confident in preparing a video presentation, then I'm sure that your individual HEI will provide you with more information when you have your tutorial with them. So dyna'r meini prawf marcio yn y Gymraeg, but I'll move on to the English slide as they are exactly the same in both languages. But it just gives you an overview of what we will be looking at when we are marking your assignments. So the marking criteria and the weighting are there and how they address the learning outcomes of the module. So 5 key areas, and they're equally distributed when it comes to marking. So the first one is analysis. The 5 key areas: the quality of the audit and identification of strengths and weaknesses. That is the first part, and that covers maybe what you looked at in Core Strand 1 and Core Strand 2. And then we'll be looking at the quality of the action plan and its feasibility as well. You know, how realistic is it in implementing those changes that you need. Then part 2, the presentation, well, this is where your analysis comes in. And the analysis of those barriers to whole setting approaches. And then finally, as part of the content then, a critical reflection on stakeholder engagement and leadership. We talked about key stakeholders quite a lot in our previous session, and I'm sure it will come up again today in our teaching sessions. And then finally, as I mentioned, the academic writing skills and the referencing. Again, I'll repeat, use the referencing guidance, and if you want to develop your academic writing, then use the link that I provided on that previous slide. So just some key points again to help you with your presentation. When you present, make sure that it's visually appealing to an audience. So think of the font type and size that you use. And I would also say avoid using too much text on the slides. You know, you use bullet points, be concise, because your presentation, your narrative then will be talking around what you have on your slides. You can use diagrams, you can use tables, you can use images. If you're using something from a source, then of course reference that. But having that variety on your slides adds interest to the audience. So think of that when you are designing your presentation. The font type and the size of your font is important. If you have a lot of text, the tendency is that the font is quite small. So, you know, think of making it accessible. A sans serif font would be clearer for the audience. It would be more accessible if you are working with somebody who has an additional learning need or specific learning difficulty. The size again, the literature sources, think of how suitable they are. We would encourage you when you are looking at research, try and access sources that have been published within the past 10 years. That will make your literature current, unless they are seminal sources, of course. If they are seminal works, then they would precede then that 10-year gap. But think about the structure. Does your narrative develop as you go through the presentation? And then the voice, and the pace, and the pitch. Vary your tone. Don't try and talk. Try not to talk too fast. And I'm very aware that I might be talking quite fast today. But try and the tendency is if you talk too fast, you might stumble over your words. And I haven't modelled that very well this morning. But just another tip for you. Timing, keep within the timing. You have your 12 minutes. Again, you have that 10% under or over, so try and keep it as close to the 12 minutes as possible. If you are using any information from the slides, from research policies, etc., please reference those on individual slides. You will have a reference list at the end, but it's important as well to have that reference on the actual slide. And you might refer to them within your narrative as well, but that is entirely up to you. Go back to the assessment guidance, and that should help you to make your presentation the best it can be. So Gallo says that in order to present an effective presentation, it should be understandable. That is, that the audience understands what you are trying to do. It should be memorable, that at the end of the presentation, that it made a real impact, and that the audience has a clear understanding of what your key messages were, and also emotional. You know, your passion for what you're doing should shine through your presentation. So again, the key the key messages here is that you need to have a simple structure. Give them an introduction, so giving them the context, starting by, telling them what you're going to discuss, an overview of what the content of your presentation will be, and then introducing each step gradually, each barrier and that analysis of them, your audit findings, the analysis of the challenges, the reflection and stakeholder engagement, and finally summarising your key messages. This isn't repeating what you've said already, but it's reinforcing your main conclusions, highlighting priorities for moving forward within your setting. And maintaining this structure will help the audience to follow your argument and ensure that your presentation remains focused. Practice your presentation because it is very, very obvious when we mark presentations where the presenter is confident and has practiced what they have prepared. Now it is coming up to 10 o'clock. I have 3 minutes for any questions, so I'll stop sharing, or you might think of questions during the day and you're more than welcome then to put